Next, from Springfield, Al Bowman, the former president of Illinois State University and current executive director of the Illinois Board of Higher Education, delivers an address at the annual meeting of the State University Annuitants Association on the state's recent struggles to secure funding for higher education. This runs about 20 minutes.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Larry. I don't have a good answer for why I came back to work, but I guess in total honesty, once higher education is in your blood, you never leave it. And I've enjoyed being here since I believe November 1st, and it's been an interesting ride. I think we've got some bumpy roads ahead of us, but I wanted to talk a little bit today about sort of where we are right now, and where we've been, and some of the challenges that are facing us. In thinking about where we are today, when I took the job in November, I had two very modest goals. And one was to help and do whatever I could, and with the agency's support, try to get a budget. The budget impasse that lasted 2 years was just devastating to higher ed. The out-migration problem got worse. Our institutions suffered reputational damage, and we all recognize that that's something that we couldn't allow to occur again. So one goal was to make the case in Springfield that a budget impasse would be devastating for higher ed. And then secondly, to attempt to get back to a place where operating budgets saw small, modest increases. And all of you know that since 2002, we've had decreases in higher ed operating budgets to the point where the spending power of the appropriation is only 49% of what it was in 2002. So even though this year's budget is still less than 2015 was, this is the first time in 16 years that we've seen an increase in operating. I also wanted to be part of an effort to grow the MAP program, and I think one of the bright spots in the Illinois budget is the commitment to students who have limited resources and making available MAP funds for higher education. We spend now $401 million on the MAP program. We didn't get an increase in it this year, but we did last year. It went up $37 million last year. It's one of the largest need-based programs in the country, and in a tight budget year, just the ability to hang on to those dollars, I consider it a win. Tom Cross, the chairman of the Board of Higher Education, as well as the SERS Board, we decided that we would make a special effort this year to push for a merit scholarship program. As you know, many years ago, Illinois supported what was called the Illinois State Scholars designation, and I think there was a $1,000 award associated with it, but over the years those dollars faded away. And we really have not had any kind of merit recognition for high achieving students. And so we proposed with the governor and the four leaders a $50 million package that would provide $5,000 awards that could be matched by an institution that would be available for 10,000 students. There are about 20,000 students in the state that are designated as Illinois State Scholars. And we thought that those dollars, especially if they had income caps that would allow it to extend into the middle class, we thought that might incentivize some students who might leave the state to remain in Illinois and attend an Illinois institution. So the legislature and the governor signed a bill that provides $25 million for merit scholarships, and it's a good start. I think I see it as a down payment, and I think going forward we'll see support for expanding that program. The governor also signed the budget that provides some emergency capital dollars for higher ed. I think that's a big step forward. We haven't had a capital bill for many, many years, and the institutions around the state that have struggled for enrollment have seen their deferred maintenance costs escalate, and of course that's had an impact on just the curb appeal of the institutions, and I think have made it even more difficult to compete for students. I'm sure many of you read Capital Facts and Rich Miller's syndicated column that appears in newspapers around the state. And he had a column a couple of weeks ago that quoted a legislative liaison named Katie Anselman. She's the legislative liaison from Eastern Illinois University. And her quotes, I think, in many ways capture where we are in higher education today. And I'd like to read a portion of that column. She testified at the Senate Higher Education Committee hearing about a month ago. She testified against the bill that would create a pilot program to allow a downstate community college to offer bachelor's degrees in nursing. The four-year universities view the legislation as a slippery slope toward turning community colleges into full-on competitors. Would that happen? I don't know. There's debate, I think legitimate debate on either side of that. But she began her testimony with a searing indictment of the current state of higher education in Illinois after the two-year budget impasse. She said, and I quote, the state's relationship with its public universities has been a bit of a catch-22 lately. In other words, darned if they do and darned if they don't. Hold the line on tuition while we reduce your state funding. Focus on teaching, but pay more attention to marketing and technology. Whittle down your programmatic offerings and don't try to be all things to all people, but make sure your majors reflect today's modern economy and are responsive to the regional workforce needs. Tell us in excruciating detail just how bad of a position we've left you in thanks to the budget impasse, but we want you to stop the out-migration and convince more Illinois families to choose Illinois public universities. And then later in her testimony, in what I like to call a mic drop moment, she said, at a time when public universities are being admonished to up our enrollments despite declining numbers of high school graduates, to identify and implement more efficiencies in our operations, to focus on what we do best, and to consider eliminating duplicative offerings, this bill sets the stage for opening up 48 new taxpayer-funded competitors in a state that has recently proven unable to reliably support the 9 universities it already has. And I think in a nutshell that sums up where we are. We are not alone. Most other states have reduced spending for public higher education, and certainly we are part of a smaller group of states that has seen reductions in excess of 30%. And I don't believe that it's an indication that the state doesn't value what we do. The state spends $3.4 billion on public higher education. Unfortunately, because of chronic underfunding in the pension system, pension holidays, and other issues around that system, of the $3.4 billion that goes to public higher ed, about $1.6 billion goes to pay pension costs. And of that $1.6 billion, 75% is old debt. So we are spending more money, in fact, far more money on old pension debt than we are on current university operations. And this is a problem we've created for ourselves. We made the problem worse by having a 2-year budget impasse in which we ran up $17 billion in unpaid bills. That pile of unpaid bills has dropped now down to just over $6 billion. It will take several years to gradually dig ourselves out of that hole. It will be done, but we all know that what we are dealing with is really a structural deficit. The state for many, many years has been spending more than it's been taking in revenue, and at some point there will be a day of reckoning, and we have to get our house in order. I tend to be in the camp that's optimistic that with good leadership and political courage, we eventually will solve this problem. I look at California, which Governor Jerry Brown took office in 2011 and left office, of course, this year. California had a far larger budget deficit than Illinois, and they ended this fiscal year with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, and they're building a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund. Certainly California has a larger population and some advantages, but we are a wealthy state, and we have many, many advantages, and I believe there is a way forward. We simply have to have policymakers and a governor who are willing to do what needs to be done. Another challenge for us in Illinois, and it's a double-edged sword, we are the 5th largest producer of high school graduates in the country. And we produce, our K-12 system is very good despite the challenges it has. We produce very good graduates. And so the Chicago area has over 80 college recruiters from institutions around the country. And those recruiters obviously want Illinois graduates, high school graduates, and in some cases they make fairly lucrative offers that entice our students to leave the state. We also are surrounded by states that have a declining number of 18-year-olds. And so the pool of 18-year-olds in states like Iowa, Wisconsin, Missouri are shrinking. The only way for public universities in Iowa to meet their enrollment targets is to recruit Illinois residents. And so consequently, schools like the University of Iowa spend an enormous amount of money on merit scholarships to entice students from Illinois to attend. That's a unique dynamic that we face, and our public institutions, I think, in many ways, were late to the table to understand the nature of that competition and what they needed to do in order to compete. The dollars that would be going to higher ed, based on a recent economic study, it's pretty clear where those dollars are going. In Illinois and in many other states, Medicaid is gobbling up a larger and larger share of state tax revenues. And in Illinois specifically, the Department of Corrections has a larger budget than university operations. Corrections will have a budget this year over $1.4 billion. It's a big number. Those challenges will make what we're facing difficult to overcome, but I'm also optimistic that as institutions adjust to this tuition-dependent kind of business model, we can begin to move forward. There are two groups of institutions in the state that I think provide a pathway that is reasonable to move forward. The University of Illinois system has seen rather dramatic increases in enrollment over the last couple of years, and my old institution, Illinois State University, has seen stable enrollment throughout the budget impasse, and in fact stable enrollment from the last recession through today. In a tuition-dependent business models, our institutions can't do what they need to do unless they meet their enrollment targets. And I believe that if the state works and invests additional dollars in things like the MAP program, merit scholarships, if we continue to see modest increases in state support for university operations, we can begin to turn this around. I don't think all hope is lost. The demand for a university education is higher than ever. 70% of the new jobs that were created since the last recession have gone to college graduates. The unemployment rate today for college graduates is 2.5%. Certainly, as students decide on pathways following high school, the university pathway is certainly appealing. The Illinois Board of Higher Ed, I think, is in a good position to continue to influence policymakers going forward. The legislature has created what's called the Higher Ed Legislative Working Group. It's a group of representatives and senators from both sides of the aisle. Pat McGuire is the head of the group. Dan Brady from the Bloomington-Normal area is also part of the group. But we've got a core of legislators who are committed to higher education and who are committed to finding some answers for these difficult problems that we've been struggling with since 2002. That group was very active during this legislative session. They will be active over the summer and certainly into the fall and next spring. Most of the higher ed legislation that was passed in this session was a product of the work done by that legislative working group. I think the group has gotten active in part because of concern about the out-migration issue. Out-migration is a serious problem. Fortunately, 2/3 of the students who earn degrees out of state come back to Illinois. But I think we as a state understand that we'll be stronger if we can entice more of those 18-year-olds, our best and our brightest, to remain in the state. But the higher ed working group, I think, is in a position to make a difference and to do some things that can move the needle and move us in a good direction. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk. My email address is on the web. If you have some follow-up questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them, or a phone call. Be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.